So here's a woman where her mentally retarded son, who can't remember his left hand from his right, remembers his mama loved him. And that's the value. She's just a woman who loved her son that much. And lawyers may not think that's worth $1 million like the owner of McDonald's is, or the CEO, but I think in our community we know better. Then Ernest picks up the Bible and he says, y'all have known me since I was a kid, and you know I ain't very good at following what's in this book. But that doesn't change the fact it's the word of the Lord. Then he wheels around and he puts his finger right at me. He says, see that boy there with the glasses? He's my Sunday school teacher. Then he says, Mark, if I want to read to the jury about love out of the Bible, where should I turn? I'm sitting there thinking, I'm so fired. They not only are going to think Ernest knifes him in the back, they're going to think he and I planned this whole thing over some secret seance handshake at church or something. How do you answer this? And all the smart alecky answers like, well, Ernest, if you'd come to Sunday school, you'd know. They're ringing in my head, but they don't come out of my mouth. Out of my mouth, I demurely say, Ernest, I'd turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So he flipping through that Bible. So, love is patient. Love is, yeah, that's what I was looking for. Thank you, Mark. And then he proceeds to read that thing to the jury down to the bottom, faith, hope, and love abide. But the greatest of these is love. And then he shuts it down and says, that's one. All right. Now, meanwhile, our local lawyer was a fellow named John Bankhead. And John Bankhead desperately thought he just saw the way to win this case. The judge declares a break. Bankhead brings us out in the hall and says, please, 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 please let me give the last 2 minutes of closing argument. If you'll just give me the last 2 minutes, I can win this baby. I can bring it home. Ernest has really stepped in it. He's made a huge mistake. I see the opening. I'll drive us home through that opening. Just give me 2 minutes. Otway says, okay. So Otway says, Your Honor, I'm going to give closing argument. I'm going to save the last 2 minutes for Mr. Bankhead. So Otway gives his argument as the out-of-town Houstonian lawyer, and then the local lawyer, John Bankhead, stands up for the final 2 minutes of riveting talk from McDonald's. Here it was. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I go to church with 8 of you, sing in the choir with 8 of you, open the door for 8 of you. And you 8 went to church not just with me, but with Ona Mae Clute while she was alive. And if there's anything we've learned at church, it's that the ways of the Lord are dark and mysterious. And then he paused, and he kind of looked down like the words weren't coming out right, and he said, well, dadgummit, what I'm trying to tell you is, for some reason, God took Ona Mae Clute. McDonald's did not send her. And with that, he sat down. We're looking at each other like, that was the crack that we're driving home through? God took Ona Mae Clute, McDonald's didn't send her. Ernest gets up. Ernest has a bushy mustache, and when he's really irritated or pulling a prank, you never know which, he starts tugging at it. Ernest gets up, and he looks at that jury, tugging at his mustache. He got an angry, hateful look at John Bankhead. Then he looks at me. Then he looks back at the jury. Each one, eye by eye. Looks at John Bankhead. Then he looks at me. First words of rebuttal. Lanier, didn't it make you want to puke when Bankhead blamed the Lord for killing Miss Clute? Well, I don't know about John's tort class, but my tort professor did not teach me how to answer that question. I said, no, sir. He said, well, it did me, and I'll bet it did the Lord. Let me tell you why. And he launched into his rebuttal. Shortly thereafter, I quit Fulbright and Schwarzkopf and went to work for Ernest Cannon. And he taught me something I call the Bruce Springsteen, Rosalita, and the front door rule. When I went to work for Ernest, I'd been doing the defense work, and at defense work, you get paid by the hour. When you do plaintiff's work like we do, you do it on a contingent fee, so you just get a cut. Defense work, if you're getting paid by the hour, you go to one of these firms like Fulbright, they want you to bill at least 2,200 hours a year. If you work 50 weeks out of the year, that's 44 hours a week that you actually bill time for. That means you're physically, supposedly, working on the files for at least that amount of time. Now, it doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out that this breeds within you a desire to be very thorough. Oh, if you could take a deposition in 5 minutes, well, they don't take depositions in 5 minutes, but let's say an hour or 5 hours. The defense lawyers generally are going for the 5 hours. Plaintiff's lawyers, on the other hand, I'm going to get the same amount of money as long as I do the work, whether I do 5 hours or 1 hour. In fact, 1 hour is better because if I go to trial, I got to read this sucker afterwards as I'm getting ready for trial. So I went in. Ernest told me, he said, Mark, he said, I want to tell you that I need you to take a deposition in the morning. The facts of the case are pretty simple. We had a bunch of these cases. A fellow's out working on an offshore oil rig for Shell. He gets sent out there to do some work. Shell had water on one of the walkways, oil on one of the walkways. He slips in the oil because it's kind of dark. You can't really see it well. Slips in the oil, blows 2 discs out in his back. Can't do that kind of work again. This was our bread and butter. We had these cases. So we sued Shell for having oil on the workplace. Ernest had noticed the deposition of the general safety guy, the head safety guy for all of Shell Oil. And he comes into Houston, and Ernest says, I need you to take this deposition tomorrow. And I said, yes, sir, I'll be ready to go. Ernest said, okay. 5 minutes before the deposition, Ernest comes into my office, and he says, are you ready? And I said, yes. He says, do you know what you got to get? Okay, now think about that question. Do you know what you got to get? I'd never been asked that in 5.5 years of practicing law. Do you know what you got to get? I said, well, I'm going to do a discovery deposition, and I've got an outline here, and I'm going to get all the information we need, and blah. Ernest said, you don't have a clue, do you, boy? He says, you're thinking like a defense lawyer. You got to know what you got to get. Come on, I'm going to show you how to do it this once. I don't want to have to show you again. You better pay attention. Yes, sir. So I get up with him. We walk into the deposition room. Court reporters there, witnesses there, defense lawyers there. Ernest says, swear this boy in. He doesn't look honest to me. Court witness looks up a little bit intimidated. Court reporter says, well, I always swear him in, Mr. Cannon. He says, well, you might need to do this one twice. He has this look about him of he takes control in a room. So the court reporter swears him in. Ernest looks at him. Now, normally you'll find out depositions go something like this. What is your name? Where do you live? What's your job title? Where'd you go to school? How did you get your job? How long have you been in that job? What are your job duties? What qualifies you to be in the job? And blah, 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 blah. About an hour and a half into the deposition. Now, have you done an investigation of this accident? What was your investigation? How did you do it? And blah, 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 blah. Okay? Here's the way this deposition goes. And I'm not making this funny. This is the way it goes. Ernest. You Bob Wilson? Yeah. You the head of safety for Shell? Yes, sir. Well, it ain't safe to have oil where people are walking, is it? Guy looks at him and says, no. Because you can see if you got oil where people are walking, someone's going to slip and blow a disc out in their back. Hey, you can see that coming, can't you? Well, yeah, it could happen. Okay, that's all I got. He turned around and walked out. I'm walking out with him. Ernest says, he says, look, these defense lawyers, they spend their time walking around the house, trying all of the different windows, trying to open the window, trying to pry through the window, trying to see if they can get into the window. And if they can find a window that's unlocked, they'll jimmy it just a little bit so they can come back later and sneak in and take the TV. He says, that's not the way we do it. I said, it's not? He said, no. He says, you use the door. That's what it's there for. You walk up to the door. If they don't open it, you kick it in. You take the TV and you walk out. And all I could think of was Bruce Springsteen's line in the Rosalita song, use the door, Rosie, that's what it's there for. and I've stuck with me ever since.